You're listening to Puma Podcast.
The bar had been set so low by the previous administration. Duterte himself was like cursing everybody, the UN, the EU, and everybody that criticizes what was happening in the Philippines. You don't see that under the president. So can that be an improvement? Yeah, kind of a passive improvement. But again, that's not to say that this is not an opening for this government to deliver on all of this rhetoric, to make this, optics become reality.
I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast. In this episode of Teka Teka News, we pass the mic to Carlos Conde. He's a senior researcher at the Asia Division of Human Rights Watch. He's also a veteran journalist who used to cover the Philippines for the New York Times. Human Rights Watch recently released the latest edition of its World Report, covering the state of rights in 2023. Carlos walks us through the Philippine chapter of the report and the state of rights under Marcos Jr. so far. Listen until the end. We also talked about the International Criminal Court's investigation of the drug war.
The Philippine chapter, we focused on red tagging because we think that is the one singular, most, I would say, significant human rights issue that the Philippines faced in 2023. And true enough, the visit here this week of the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, Irene Khan, focused a lot of attention on red tagging. So that's why we also felt that red tagging needed to be front and center of the Philippines chapter.
Is it a bit harder to make people aware that this is still a big issue, possibly a worsening issue, because the red tagging isn't coming directly from the president as opposed to the previous administration?
Well, that's certainly a factor, I think, Bella, and I'm glad you pointed out, because red tagging is state policy. Regardless of what you hear from the DOJ that is not state policy, it is state policy. And why is that? We see that being carried out in many, many agencies of the government. We see that being done by people identified with government. We see that in the way that they address dissent and criticism. Kind of the instinct by the police and the military is to call anybody who criticizes the government as a communist supporter or a communist sympathizer, and in many instances, a communist combatant, which is preposterous. We can even say that the red tagging has actually worsened. Just to cite to you an example, during the time of President Duterte, Human Rights Watch was not red tagged specifically. But under Marcos, the Department of Justice Secretary himself red tagged Human Rights Watch, singled us out because of our criticism of the government regarding the ICC. And the red tagging is continuing, and it is, in fact, expanding to cover many, many other sectors of society.
In its report, Human Rights Watch cited the red tagging of Jonathan De Santos, chairman of the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines. He was baselessly accused by pro-administration anchors of the Sunshine Media Network International, or SMNI, of being part of the armed wing of the Communist Party. The report also mentioned cases filed by journalist Ato Maraulio and his mother, activist Carol Araulio, suing the same host on SMNI for red tagging their family.
If you look at the news, for instance, about the visit of Rapporteur Irene Khan, you would see statements from the DOJ, statements from Malacanang and all sorts of agencies, praising how human rights and press freedom and freedom of expression in the Philippines is being respected. Okay, but the reality on the ground is much more complicated. So on the one hand, agencies like the Presidential Task Force on Media Safety said, press freedom in the Philippines is fine and dandy and very vibrant. Okay, fine. I mean, anybody in the Philippines can publish anything, can write and report anything. But what they don't tell you, Bella, is that the repercussions, the consequences of speaking out in the Philippines can be quite dire and can be quite lethal in many instances. We talked about the release of Viola de Lima, as well as the charges that were being filed against Rapra and Maria Ressa, how these are being dropped or being dismissed one after the other. So that's all good. Now, the overall kind of tone of the report is that Human Rights Watch is happy that things relatively have improved when compared to the past administration. The Marcos administration is doing certain things that many of us in the international human rights movement consider to be improvements. You know, the open engagement with international accountability actors such as the UN and the UN Human Rights Council and the EU and many other diplomatic countries. That's certainly very, very welcome. We noted there the fact that this administration has agreed to invite special rapporteurs and are continuing their efforts to conduct or to hold dialogue with civil society and the diplomatic community about the human rights issues that we continue to face.
You did mention that overall Human Rights Watch is seeing, improvements under this administration. I read the write-up on the Philippine chapter on your website, and it starts with something like the human rights situation in the Philippines remains dire. So my question is there a certain trouble communicating those two things? On the one end, it is an improvement compared to the previous administration, but it remains dire.
There certainly is a huge gap still between what the government actually does to address these human rights issues and what are happening on the ground. I mean, the reason why we think that there's been an improvement, and it's not just us actually, some other human rights groups, even those the most critical ones, concede that there are improvements. It's because the more open engagement that they're doing. I mean, but certainly that doesn't mean that the key issues that we face, for instance, the killings in the drug war, that's still happening. The drug war as a policy is still in place. In fact, according to the monitoring and documentation by the University of the Philippines, more drug war killings actually occurred during the first year of Ferdinand Marcos than during the last year of Rodrigo Duterte. So that is very, very telling. But also, on the other hand, the red tagging, the harassment, the intimidation, the campaign of intimidation against political activists, environmentalists, and all sorts of Filipinos are still happening. I think that is the context that we need to keep in mind here, that just because we're seeing some improvement doesn't mean that the situation has completely turned around. Accountability under Marcos remains practically zero. And we're talking about accountability for extrajudicial killings in the drug war, for instance. Out of the thousands and thousands of cases that have happened since 2016, only 2 cases have resulted in a conviction of police officers implicated in a drug war killing. Now, that is outrageous, right? So, under Marcos, it hasn't happened yet.
We'll take a quick break here. Later, more on the drug war and how the Marcos administration is handling the International Criminal Court's probe of it.
President Marcos announced that they're filing 177 cases against 177 police officers. I mean, that's good. It's about time that these corrupt and abusive police officers are brought to justice. But they didn't even say what sort of cases are these. Are these related to the drug war, or are these just cases, small cases of police officers committing insignificant or low, I would say, crimes? But the effect of that is that once you tell the international community that you're filing cases against dozens of police officers, the effect of that is that, oh, wow, something good is happening in the Philippines. This president is taking action. But, we have to look at the more serious issues here where the president, this government needs to act on. And these are, extrajudicial killings, attacks against activists, the drug war killings, and all of these issues, all of these key human rights issues.
It seems like a lot of the improvement that has been credited to this administration has to do with their increased engagement and openness to international actors, saying on the international stage that it values human rights, which, certainly is a departure from the last administration and can be viewed as an improvement in itself. But have we seen actual tangible results and improvements from that in this administration?
A lot of these quote unquote improvements are optics driven. This administration is very, very concerned about its image in the international community. So that's why they're doing this. That's why, they go to Geneva, they go to Brussels, they go every chance they get. So the question now, as you put it, is that has all of this rhetoric actually translated into action on the ground? Now, not a lot. Although we have to say, for instance, that in the case of the DOJ, they have made some actual improvement quite apart from the rhetoric by, for instance, releasing thousands of detainees from the Philippine penitentiary and the Philippine detention facilities and the Philippine detention system. And that is good because congestion of these detention facilities is a very, very huge, it's a huge human rights problem in the Philippines. So, they're trying to improve systems in a way that would allow poor litigants or poor respondents in cases to file bail so that they don't have to spend a night in jail, for instance. So these are all good. But apart from that, we don't see much. And the most important kind of gauge of for us to be able to say that all of this talk is actually translating into action is accountability. And in that regard, it's just talk right now. It's just talk. I mean, because again, there's no conviction of cases. And even the ones in the drug war that they say they are investigating, the Philippine government is not giving out, credible, accurate, and timely information about the status of these cases.
Okay, let me say this for the 100th time. I do not recognize the jurisdiction of ICC in the Philippines. I consider it as a threat to our sovereignty. Therefore, the Philippine government will not lift a finger to help any investigation that the ICC conducts.
That's President Marcos Jr. speaking to the media on January 23, 2024.
However, as ordinary people, they can come and visit the Philippines. Pero hindi kami tutulong sa kanila. In fact, binabantayan namin sila, making sure that they do not come into contact with any agency of government. And if they are contacting agencies of government, sasabihin yung whatever, policeman, local government, sabihin nyo, wag nyo sasagutin. Yun ang sagot natin. That we do not recognize your jurisdiction, therefore we will not assist in any way, shape, or form.
I wanted to ask, how do you view all the developments around the ICC case?
During the campaign, at the start of his term, he was very, very clear and adamant about not allowing the ICC or not helping the ICC, right? And then the other day he says, even the DOJ says, they can come here, but we will not help them. And now they're saying again that, the ICC's presence here is an affront to our sovereignty. So, it almost seems like they're trying to speak to different audiences. And to some degree, that's true. These inconsistent statements coming from the Philippine government points to the fact that President Marcos is not willing at this point to frontally assault the Dutertes or former President Duterte or Vice President Sara Duterte by saying that they welcome the ICC and they will cooperate. He will not say that at this point because he has an alliance to try to keep. So a lot of the local politics is at play here. But at the same time, he needs to tell the international community that the ICC or any international accountability mechanism may have a room in the Philippines under his watch. I personally am not confident that Mr. Marcos will have a drastic kind of, 180-degree turn against the Dutertes at this point. Not now. But certainly, the ICC is there. It serves a purpose to this administration. You now see the likes of Senator Bato de la Rosa fidgeting about the possibility of the ICC coming over, which is good because, justice still has to happen in this country, and many of those who were culpable in the human rights catastrophe that is a drug war are still there, are still in office, and they need to be made to account.
From the perspective of the case itself, how significant do you think it is that, at the very least, representatives from the ICC will be allowed to enter the country?
Look, the ICC will be able to do its job better if they're allowed entry, if the Philippine government is cooperating. Now, we're not, of course, the Philippines is no longer a member of the ICC and the Rome Statute, right? But under the Rome Statute, even if a country has left the ICC, it is still obligated to cooperate with an ongoing ICC investigation for alleged crimes committed when it was still a member. So that still applies. The ICC, from my understanding, can still investigate even without coming here. We're just hoping that actually all of these rumors of them having been here and having talked to people are true, because God knows the thousands and thousands of victims of the drug war need the wheels of justice, be it the ICC, be it the Human Rights Council, to turn finally.
From your perspective as someone in human rights work and also someone who's a veteran journalist, what are the major differences in your line of work under this administration compared to the last one?
There certainly is change, because the kind of the absence or the lack now of violent rhetoric against human rights activists and the victims of human rights violation certainly creates that feeling that things are better. When you have that little bit of additional confidence, it makes you do your job much easier. You can even say that the space is still there, that I am still able to talk to people without fear for my life, at least compared to what I was doing before. But having said all that, if you look at this from the perspective of victims of violence, for instance, nothing significant has changed. In the communities where the drug war is still happening, recently, I set up interviews with several families of victims of the drug war. And a number of them backed out at the last minute out of fear. So this fear, this climate of fear in poor communities where the drug war is still being waged, I mean, it's still there. So I think it depends on who you're talking to or who you ask that question to. You know, if you ask, for instance, the victims of the drug war, the unionists, the activists who are in the front lines defending democracy or dissenting against state policy, they are still under the gun. Red tagging is still there. Political assassinations are still happening. This country is still suffering from what I call as an epidemic of riding and tandem killings. Killing people in this country remains a very, very easy thing to do and cheap thing to do. So that's still a problem, and that hasn't changed just because we have a new president. So again, this goes back to my earlier point about accountability. How do you end impunity? You end impunity by ensuring accountability, and we have not seen that yet.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. Pidoy Blanco edited this episode. Our executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior news editor is Veronica Uwe. If you found this episode useful, share it with a friend or two. Thanks for listening.